If Tekashi 6ix9ine beats this case, I'll suck his. He don't even have to ask me.
Oh my God!
I sniffed your chair last time you was
You're
here.
a sick person.
I know. I did. I couldn't help it.
J-Lo just left.
Trying to stay relevant in hip-hop is already tough, but things get even more challenging when your job relies on your opinion. As when your thoughts and experiences are your main asset, it's a constant challenge to keep people interested without relying on public beefs, worn-out gimmicks, or publicity stunts. For Charlamagne Tha God, there was a period when the culture latched on to his every word. Brash, smart, uncompromising, and always hilarious, his controversial antics once made The Breakfast Club a must-listen and made him into a household name. In fact, at one stage, there was a case to be made that he was one of the preeminent voices in hip-hop.
I've been a fan of yours for a while. I think you're the last great radio host, and you will be the last famous radio host, because I think radio is a dying thing. You're the last great one.
But a lot has happened since Joe uttered those words. And after years of dominance, Charlamagne has reached the point where his relevancy is in free fall. Between his attempts to overhaul his identity to appeal to a mainstream audience, to a slew of canceled television shows and accusations of pandering, Charlamagne's career has never looked more confusing. But before we get to that, let's back it up a little bit to look at how his legacy was built. Taken from a name that he had given himself while in prison on drug charges, Leonard McKelvey's career as Charlamagne began in the most inconspicuous of ways. I was just a young kid trying to figure it out. Pursuing a rap career actually led me to radio. I was sitting in a recording studio and I met a radio personality by the name of Willie Will. I just asked him how he got into radio, and he told me he went to the radio station and got an internship. This is 1998 in Charleston, South Carolina, so things were a lot different then. After 7 years of grinding and getting fired from multiple local radio stations, Charlamagne got his big break in 2006 when he became the second mic on The Wendy Williams Show. For those 2 years he spent beside her, Charlamagne learned the ropes and honed his trademark confrontational style. But make no mistake, he was still very much the supporting cast and was treated that way. Although he could pretty much do whatever he liked with more vulnerable guests like Buffy the Body or Cassie, he didn't have the clout to avoid getting called out on Wendy's show, as back then, guests had no reason to fear him. Just look at what Andrew Dice Clay did to him.
Are you part of the show?
I'm a sidekick.
Yeah.
I think Mike Tyson has a better chance of making a comeback than you, though.
That's what you should be, a sidekick, a flunky. Let me ask you, did you put him up to that? It just seems like you let him do that.
After he joined The Breakfast Club, Charlamagne was empowered to fully embrace the role of shock jock. Capable of asking deeply personal questions in a rude, almost abrupt manner, Charlamagne's reign of terror on The Breakfast Club was so successful that it empowered Power 106 to finally overtake Hot 97's morning program to become the #1 hip-hop radio station in the country. From Birdman asking for respect to be put on his name and making Lil Mama cry, to his seriously questionable behavior towards various guests, you just had to tune in to hear whatever Charlamagne had to say. Combined with his interviews on Vlad TV, he basically became the original king of the hot take, essentially laying the groundwork for the personas of plenty of people who'd enter the media space to come. But over time, Charlamagne seemed to retire that persona, making way for people to come along with even more willingness to troll and less to lose. So even while he had a long spate where he was feared and people couldn't simply mock him like Dice did, this couldn't last forever, particularly when an increasingly tame Charlamagne came up against Tekashi 6ix9ine at the peak of his powers.
Yo, boy, it's not hard to find me.
Don't call me a boy, please.
It's not hard to find me. If someone wanted to find me, they would have been found me.
I don't know these.
Now he don't want to get caught up in it. You see how I get under his skin?
At this moment, people noticed that if Charlamagne could be defanged by someone like Tekashi, then there was nothing to fear. And in trying to argue with a master troll, he picked up an emphatic L.
Listen, Charlamagne, you don't got no Billboard records.
Yeah, because I got a nationally syndicated radio show.
You don't got no Billboard records.
I got a nationally syndicated radio show. I got a New York Times best-selling book. I've had hit TV shows. I executive produce a lot of TV shows. I got movies coming out.
To be honest, if it wasn't for this, I would have never heard about you.
But to make matters worse, there was actually a fair point made by Tekashi, in that when it comes to Charlamagne's notoriety, it mostly comes down to his time on The Breakfast Club. That's not anything to be ashamed about, and they have sustained a successful run for a long time. But it seems that it's a narrative that Charlamagne wants to change and has led to constant attempts to branch out. However, his moves into other media haven't been so seamless. Let's start with his TV shows, Uncommon Sense, The God's Honest Truth, and Hell of a Week. In each case, they didn't last too long before ratings plummeted and they were eventually canceled. In the case of the last two, even the aid of late night legends like Stephen Colbert didn't help, and perhaps neither did Charlamagne's very blatant attempt to rebrand. Billed as the conversations that were happening in the barbershops, Charlamagne even went as far as being billed under his real name. When I hear the name Leonard, I think about my grandma, I think about my mama. The name snaps me back into reality and it just keeps me from being a caricature of myself. From there, he doubled down saying that, not only is this what I should be doing now, I feel like this is my future. Well, if it is Charlamagne's future, it unfortunately looked bleak, as once again, it was proven that people simply weren't interested in the newer, more politically correct version of Charlamagne. Besides, it's bizarre that he even seems so eager to get into TV when the TV industry is a sinking ship. Having said that, his attempts to transition into the world of podcasting hasn't gone perfectly either. Launched in September 2020, Charlamagne and iHeartRadio launched the Black Effect Network amid the content gold rush of the pandemic. I saw what Bill Simmons was doing with The Ringer, and I realized there wasn't a place like that serving black people and the black audience. I felt like if I could get a machine like iHeart behind a company that could get all of these black podcasts together under one umbrella, we could have tremendous success. And we have. At its core, it's an admirable concept, and they've had some successes with shows like Checking In with Michelle Williams, Reasonably Shady, Green Money, and 85 South Show. However, for every podcast that gained an audience, there's dozens that have yet to take off. Not to mention, it was quite a bold move for iHeart to team up with Charlamagne, especially given the current cultural climate. Circling back to 2018, an old charge from 2001 resurfaced against him. Fortunately for Charlamagne, the 3 years of parole he'd already served were considered sufficient, and the case was dropped. Still, this incident, which he personally had no involvement in, has intensified the scrutiny of his past towards women. Because of this, Charlamagne to this day continues to try and make amends.
Why am I giving myself donkey today? Because I feel stupid that I am just now realizing that a lot of us men in America have been raised on culture. I feel bad and extremely dumb that I didn't realize this earlier in my life. I look at some of the things I used to say to women in interviews here on The Breakfast Club, and I'm like, bruh, you was wildin'.
While what he's saying has a lot of validity to it, there seems to be a great deal of suspicion that he's only walking back his past comments today in order to progress his career. After all, this is a man that went from sniffing J-Lo's chair to interviewing Kamala Harris and Joe Biden. With those accolades, it makes sense that he might want to be seen as more than just a shock jock whose career is built on controversy. The only problem is that when he tries to push forward, he keeps getting viciously checked. Just look at what Larry Elder did to him.
And when Joe Biden insulted you by saying, you ain't really black, we don't know whether or not you want to vote for me or vote for Donald Trump, that should have been a wake-up call on your part. How dare this guy come in here and insult you, a black man, and tell you you got to think a certain kind of way. I'm amazed that you weren't mad about that.
I'm not going to say it upset me, just like I'm not letting you upset me. You know what I mean? I don't tend to get upset over things like that.
Well, he came in here and told you aren't even black and let you think a certain kind of way. It seemed to me that should have been a wake-up call for you, but it wasn't, apparently.
Yeah.
Continuing to be marginalized, there are even those who believe that just as he started as a B-Mic on the Wendy Williams show, he's reverting back to that now on his own podcast.
Oh, I'm not arguing with nobody that's the B-Mic on their show. If it's your show and you the B-Mic, shut the up. I'm not arguing. You've taken yourself out of Pod Wars.
He's 100% the B-Mic.
Okay.
When he's sitting next to Schultz on his show.
Enduring these harsh words from the man who basically occupies the space that Charlamagne once had as the #1 cultural commentator, Joe's critique comes in reference to how Charlamagne's co-host on The Brilliant Idiots has basically eclipsed him in terms of fame. Back when the podcast started, Andrew Schultz was the up-and-comer and Charlamagne's star power legitimized him. But that's not the case anymore, with Brilliant Idiots becoming the less popular of Schultz's two podcasts. And in the view of academics, a major part of this came because Charlamagne began to water down his persona.
For future episodes of Brilliant Idiots, he was a very toned down PC version of himself. You have a guy next to you who's still got his gun on, shooting up everywhere and always doing his thing. You might assume the person who's kind of keeping it a little bit tamer is the B-Mic, but I don't think so.
In essence, what academics' comments allude to is that the self-preservation Charlamagne does is backfiring on him. And suddenly becoming a much more sedate and conscious version of himself, he's unfortunately misinterpreted what people tuned into The Breakfast Club for. Simply put, it wasn't really about his deep insights or political opinions. People were there for the wild, unpredictable moments. And sadly, by stepping away from that chaos, he's essentially boxed himself out of the niche he used to dominate. Nowadays, Charleston White, Boosie, and TK Kirkland are now inhabiting that position as the go-to guy for cultural hot takes for Vlad TV, and DJ Academics is the voice of hip-hop to many teens and young adults. Meanwhile, it's hard to imagine that any TV network will be willing to take the chance on another show bearing Charla's name. Still, for everything that it's worth, he solidified his position, and for every failure at crossing over, he's got a tendency to put a positive spin on it.
People are not willing to grow because they get stuck in the one thing that worked for them. Imagine if I was still doing what I was doing 15 years ago. I'd have been played out. The reason I would have been played out is because people will see through that. They know that's performative.
And as we've talked about, Charlamagne's attempts to move past his old persona haven't been as successful as he's hoped. But one thing is clear, he's not a quitter, or perhaps he simply can't go back to who he was before.
I read YouTube comments and people say he lost his edge. And really, it's not that he lost his edge. He's still clever. He's still witty. Like, y'all interviewed Charlamagne in 2013. In the interview, that say, yo, Ack, right now, it's too hot to black. Right now, you need your Nubian white. That was toxic. I ain't gonna hold you. Imagine if he was still sniffing seats, bro. they would have tried to put this in Guantanamo Bay. I think he kind of realized, like, yo, bro, you got to chill, tone it down. And I think that's what he did, just toned it down.
Still, it doesn't help that he doesn't always practice what he preaches. Because of the fact that he still exists in the Breakfast Club space, where he occasionally dips back into his old persona, fans are confused by who Charlamagne really is. And as a result, it's hard for anyone to fully support his new ventures when they come off as temporary or inauthentic, because now it's even starting to stress out the people close to him.
Why you jumping this though? You don't even know her. You got to get to know her and court her and, see if y'all are compatible. She might not even want to give you nothing.
Right. Bro, what happened to you?
What do you mean? I've always said that.
I want my legacy to be a legacy of service, Charlotte told Forbes. I want people from all walks of life to talk about how I serve them in some capacity. That's what I feel like we're all here to do. I want to be of service to my family, and I want to be of service to our people, period. At the moment, it's safe to say that Charlamagne isn't measuring up to that mark. If you ask most people to summarize who Charlamagne is and what his legacy means at the moment, it'll still equate to not much more than the shock jock reputation that he garnered during the start of his career. At 46 years old, Charlamagne clearly sees his path being in mainstream media, but at the moment, it's a tough market for him to crack. Still, wherever he goes from here, I think it's important to remember that The Breakfast Club is still the #1 urban morning show in the country. Charlotte has already given us 20 plus years of entertainment and firmly solidified himself in the Radio Hall of Fame. However, he needs to be cautious with his next steps, or he risks a big fall.